There's a kind of woman who's been through heartbreak so deep it nearly broke her. But she still gets up, still loves, still chooses to be kind in a world that wasn't always kind to her. And if that's you, if you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or made to feel like you weren't enough, I want you to stay. Because this video is your reminder you are not broken, you are becoming, and the world needs the woman you're still learning to be. Let me know if you'd like a variation that directly addresses ladies, or emphasizes a specific emotion like healing, strength, or self-worth. There are things she's lived through that she's never said out loud. Not because they weren't painful, but because they were too painful. Because putting them into words would mean reliving them. So instead, she carried them silently. She buried the tears in her pillow, hid the screams in the shower, and smiled in rooms where her soul was breaking. No one saw the nights she questioned if she was enough. No one heard the thoughts she battled when the world seemed to keep moving without her, but she kept waking up, she kept breathing, and somewhere between surviving and pretending, she started building her strength. There were days she felt like she was disappearing, like her heart had shattered into so many pieces that no one could possibly understand how much it hurt. She felt invisible even when she was surrounded by people, because it's not about who's around you, it's about who truly sees you. And when you're hurting that deeply, silence becomes your language. She learned to shrink herself to avoid being a burden, to nod and say I'm fine when her world was falling apart, but deep down, she was screaming for someone to just hold her and not let go. But no one came, not in the way she needed, and so she held herself. She wiped her own tears, whispered strength into her bones, and chose to keep going even when her heart begged her to give up. That kind of strength doesn't come from comfort. It's born in the moments you feel the most alone, in the nights you pray and feel like no one's listening, in the mornings you rise and wonder why it still hurts. She kept choosing life. Not because it was easy, but because something inside her refused to let the pain win. She stopped looking for someone to rescue her. She realized the only person who could save her was the one staring back in the mirror. And that realization broke her, but it also rebuilt her. She started showing up for herself in quiet ways, like making her bed even when she didn't want to get out of it, like going for a walk just to feel the sun on her face, like crying without shame because healing isn't always pretty. She let herself feel. And little by little, her pain became a place where her power was born. She started setting boundaries, not because she stopped loving others, but because she finally started loving herself. She stopped over-explaining her heart. She stopped begging to be understood. She learned that the people who truly care won't need convincing, and the ones who don't never really mattered. She reclaimed the space she gave away trying to please others. She stopped apologizing for her sensitivity, for her depth, for her silence. Because all those things are not flaws, they're proof that she's lived through storms and still kept her softness. There's a kind of beauty in a woman who doesn't announce her pain but still wears her resilience like a crown. The world might never know what she's endured. They might never see the nights she collapsed on her bathroom floor asking why she wasn't enough. They might not know how close she came to giving up, but she knows. She remembers every time she put one foot in front of the other when her soul was too tired to move. That strength, that quiet, unseen strength, is what makes her untouchable. Now, she walks differently, not because she's unbothered, but because she's been bothered enough. She speaks less, but listens more. She no longer entertains people who make her question her worth. She's not chasing love. She's not proving herself. She knows what she brings to the table, and she's no longer afraid to eat alone. Her silence now is sacred, not sad. Her presence is grounded, and there's a fire in her eyes that comes from walking through darkness and still choosing to shine. She stopped waiting for closure that would never come. She stopped rereading the past, trying to make sense of the hurt. Some pain doesn't come with answers. It just comes with lessons. And she learned. She learned that not everyone will love you right. She learned that sometimes the person you trusted the most can be the one who wounds you the deepest. But she also learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. It means letting go without losing yourself. It means choosing peace over answers. She doesn't talk about it much, the way she had to rebuild her spirit from scratch, the way she carried herself through the kind of heartbreak that doesn't leave visible bruises, but it changed her. It taught her to stop begging for love and start becoming love. It taught her that peace isn't found in another person, it's created within. And now she glows differently, not because life got easier, but because she became stronger. Her power isn't loud, it's not in your face, but it's unshakable, because she built it in the dark. And that's what makes her untouchable. Not because she's invincible, but because she's been broken and rebuilt. Because she's walked through fire and came out with her soul still intact. Because she's soft, but not weak. Because she knows what it costs to stay whole in a world that keeps trying to break her. Her pain didn't destroy her. It made her deeper, wiser, fiercer. She's not bitter, she's better. And even when the world underestimated her, she kept choosing herself over and over again. That's what makes her rare, that's what makes her powerful, that's what makes her untouchable. There's something deeply painful about knowing your own worth while watching others overlook it, about sitting silently in a room where your soul is glowing and no one even sees the light. She used to wonder what was wrong with her, why her love wasn't enough, why her voice didn't matter, why her presence didn't feel needed. But then she realized some people can't recognize the kind of beauty that isn't loud. Some people don't understand value unless it's begging to be seen, and she was never meant to beg. Her heart was built for more than convincing people to choose her. She grew tired of trying to prove herself, tired of shrinking just to fit in someone else's limited view of who she should be. She stopped watering herself down so others wouldn't feel overwhelmed by her depth. She stopped softening her truth so someone else could feel comfortable. Because what's the point of being loved if it requires pretending you're less? The cost of being liked was too high. It required losing herself. And she was done paying that price. She finally realized that being overlooked doesn't mean she lacks worth. It means they lack the eyes to see it. Every time she was dismissed, something inside her began to wake up. At first, it was just a whisper, a quiet knowing that said, "You deserve more." But over time, that whisper became a roar. She no longer needed attention to feel seen. She no longer needed approval to feel enough. Because she had spent enough time trying to earn love that should have been freely given. And all it did was leave her empty. That emptiness taught her to sit with herself, to look at the mirror and see value that no one else had affirmed. It wasn't easy. There were nights she broke apart wondering if anyone would ever love her fully, if anyone would ever choose her without conditions, without comparisons, without running away. But somehow, through the ache, she began to find pieces of herself. Pieces that had been buried under years of people-pleasing and self-doubt. She began to speak up for herself. Not loudly, but clearly. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She stopped feeling guilty for wanting more than crumbs. Because she finally understood, her value was never up for negotiation. She no longer fights to be chosen. She no longer tries to convince anyone that she's worth staying for. That fight nearly broke her once. It left her exhausted, anxious, and doubting everything beautiful about herself. She used to believe that being loved meant being picked. Now she knows that being loved means being respected, cherished, and seen, even in your quietest moments. She's not interested in performing anymore. She's not chasing connections that feel like competition. If she has to fight for a place in someone's life, she's already lost herself. Her silence became her strength. She used to think being quiet meant being weak, but now her silence is power. It's the space where she reclaims herself, where she decides who gets access to her heart. Because she's learned the difference between being needed and being valued. She doesn't want to be someone's option. She wants to be someone's peace. And she'd rather walk alone than be surrounded by people who only love her when it's convenient. That choice, to walk away instead of begging, changed everything. She's not bitter, she's better. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she used the pain to grow. She turned every rejection into redirection, every dismissal into a boundary, every silent tear into a sacred promise. I will never abandon my cell. F again. And now she stands with a calm in her soul that can't be shaken by someone else's inability to see her. She doesn't need a crowd to feel worthy. She doesn't need someone's validation to feel whole. She knows what she brings, and she knows that the right heart will never ask her to dim her light. She radiates a quiet confidence now, the kind that comes from being broken and still believing she's enough, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. She walks into rooms no longer wondering if she belongs, because she belongs to herself first, and that makes her unshakable. She no longer overgives just to feel needed. She gives when it's safe. She loves when it's mutual, and she rests when her soul needs tending. She finally understands her worth is not a reflection of who chooses her, it's a reflection of who she's become. She gave herself the love she was waiting for. She started speaking kindly to herself when no one else did. She held her own heart when it was heavy. She looked in the mirror and stopped pointing out the flaws. She saw the scars and still called herself beautiful. And from that place of wholeness, she began to heal. Not because life got easier, but because she finally stopped expecting someone else to make her feel enough. She became the love, the safety, the home she had always searched for, and that changed her energy forever. There's something sacred about a woman who knows her worth, even when she's unseen. She doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. She doesn't need to be praised to be radiant. She is soft, strong, and sure, not because others told her so, but because she decided to believe it. She walks with grace, not arrogance, with quiet fire, not fury, and when you meet her, you feel it, that untouchable presence of someone who chose herself when no one else did, who stood in her truth even when it meant standing alone. That kind of woman can never be forgotten. There was a time she used to explain everything, every tear, every silence, every boundary. She didn't want to be misunderstood, so she gave pieces of herself in hopes that someone would finally say, "I get it, I see you." But they didn't. Instead, they used her vulnerability as a weapon, twisted her words, questioned her intentions, and made her feel like protecting her peace was selfish. So she stopped. Not because she didn't care anymore, but because she cared too much. About her own sanity, her own healing, her own voice. It was never about shutting people out. It was about finally letting herself in. She learned the hardest way that not everyone deserves access to her heart, that some people only come close to break what they don't understand. And she had spent far too long handing out keys to people who never planned to stay, people who didn't ask how she was, only what she could give. She became tired of the noise, the manipulation disguised as care, the pressure to stay silent just to keep the peace for others. Her peace had become a battlefield. And when a woman gets tired of fighting for her own soul, something in her changes forever. There were nights her chest ached from carrying too much, thoughts racing, heart pounding, spirit tired. She tried journaling, praying, distracting herself with tasks just to avoid the emptiness. But silence would always find her. And instead of fearing it, she sat with it. She sat in the quiet and let it teach her what people never did. That she was allowed to say no. That she was allowed to walk away without guilt. That protecting her peace wasn't a weakness, it was a boundary. One she should have set long ago, but no one ever taught her how. The people who were once closest to her made her feel guilty for choosing herself. They called her distant, cold, selfish. But none of them saw how much she had already given. She was the listener, the fixer, the one who checked in but rarely got checked on. And it hurt deeply to realize that her absence didn't shake the rooms she thought she held together, that her silence went unnoticed by the very people she once broke herself to support. But that hurt became clarity. That pain became her compass. She started choosing peace, even when it meant letting go. She stopped arguing with people who were committed to misunderstanding her. She stopped explaining herself to people who only listened to reply, not to understand. She stopped pouring into conversations that left her drained. Her peace began with quiet exits, not dramatic ones, just slow steps backward from places that didn't feel safe anymore. She no longer needed to be right, to be validated, to be seen by those who refused to see her heart. She chose stillness. Not because everything was okay, but because chaos had become too familiar and peace was now sacred. At first, the silence was lonely. It echoed with memories, regrets, and unanswered questions. But over time, it became comforting. It became her sanctuary. In the stillness, she started to hear her own voice again, the one that had been silenced for so long. It told her she was enough, that she didn't need to chase anyone's love or loyalty, that real love would never require her to abandon herself, that she could be whole without being needed, that her presence didn't have to be loud to be powerful. In the silence, she became her own safe place. She no longer responds to every invitation into chaos. She doesn't chase closure. She doesn't explain her distance. If her absence feels cold, it's because her presence was taken for granted. She gave until it hurt, and then gave some more. But now, she holds herself the way she once hoped others would, gently, firmly, completely. And that love, that fierce, quiet love for herself, built walls where there were once open doors, not to shut the world out, but to protect the peace she fought so long to find. She no longer lets just anyone walk in. There's a quiet power in walking away without a scene, in choosing silence over proving a point, in knowing your peace is too expensive to trade for temporary comfort. She knows now that not every apology is sincere, not every "I miss you" means "I value you," and not every connection is meant to last. She no longer feels guilty for choosing solitude over forced conversations. She no longer feels the need to keep explaining why she had to let go. The truth is, sometimes healing means walking away, not because you don't love them, but because you finally love yourself. She takes walks now without her phone, just to hear the sound of her own breath. She lights candles in the dark and listens to the rain as if it were music. She doesn't need noise to feel alive anymore. She stopped letting guilt dictate her decisions. She has peace now, not because life is perfect, but because she stopped letting broken people decide her worth. She knows what it cost to reclaim her spirit, and she guards it fiercely, with softness, with silence, with space. Peace doesn't mean nothing hurts anymore. It means she's finally free to feel without fear. There's nothing more powerful than a woman who protects her peace, who doesn't flinch at silence, who doesn't beg to be heard. She has cried enough tears to flood every room she once kept quiet in. She has felt every kind of ache that silence could hold, but she came out stronger, not harder, just wiser. Her peace is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of healing. And now, when she walks into a room, she brings that stillness with her, that unspoken strength, that sacred quiet that says, I've been through the fire, and I'm still soft, but I'm no longer open to the storm. She loved with a heart that had every reason to close, but still opened, not because she forgot the pain, but because she refused to let it define her. She had every right to turn cold, to shut down, to build walls high enough that no one could climb, but she didn't. She chose softness after being broken. She chose trust after being betrayed. She chose to love not because it was safe, but because it was who she was at her core. And that choice, after all she had endured, is what made her powerful, because anyone can love when it's easy. But to love again after heartbreak, that's sacred. There were moments when her heart felt like a battlefield, days when she couldn't tell if she was healing or just learning how to hide the pain better. Her laughter returned, but only in short waves. Her eyes sparkled, but only in public. She showed up, smiled, carried on, while inside she was still bleeding. People praised her strength, but none of them knew the price she paid for it. They didn't see her lying awake at 2 a.m., trying to silence the voice that kept asking why she wasn't enough. She didn't need pity. She needed space to breathe, to feel, to fall apart and rebuild. She never expected the ones she loved to be perfect. She only wanted honesty, kindness, presence. But time and time again, she was met with absence, words that didn't match actions, promises made, then broken. She stayed longer than she should have, not because she didn't see the truth, but because her heart hoped it would change. And that hope, it hurt. It burned her every time. But even when she walked away, she didn't let that pain turn her bitter. She carried it quietly. She let it teach her. And she vowed to never abandon herself again for someone else's comfort. There's something deeply gut-wrenching about giving your best and still feeling like it wasn't enough. About showing someone the most tender parts of you, only to be met with silence. She questioned herself for months, replayed every moment, wondered if her love was too much, too soft, too loud, too complicated. But she wasn't too much, she was just too real for people who weren't ready. And once she understood that, she stopped internalizing rejection. It still hurt, but it no longer defined her. She knew she had loved deeply, and that was nothing to be ashamed of. Even when her heart shattered, she still believed in love. That belief didn't come from fantasy, it came from courage. It came from waking up on the days she didn't want to, from choosing to smile at strangers when she was empty inside, from choosing to be kind in a world that hadn't always been kind to her. She didn't love because life was easy. She loved because she refused to let the world harden her, and that made her rare. Not everyone can take their wounds and still choose to be soft, still choose to be giving, still choose to love. She learned to love herself in the absence of love from others. She looked in the mirror and forgave the girl who had stayed too long, who had lowered her standards, who had accepted less just to feel something. She no longer judged herself for it. She understood now. She was never weak. She was hopeful, brave enough to believe in people. But now she was braver. Braver because she loved herself enough to walk away, to choose silence over chaos, to choose peace over temporary affection. And that kind of love, the one she gives herself now, is deeper than any she ever begged for. She doesn't open up easily anymore, not because she's guarded, but because she's intentional. Her love is no longer for everyone. It's sacred, reserved, and she no longer romanticizes potential. She sees actions, energy, safety. She listens more to her intuition, to her body, to her peace. And if something feels off, she doesn't ignore it. She doesn't justify it. She leaves. Not because she's cold, but because she has learned. She has earned her wisdom through sleepless nights and tear-stained pillows. And now her love is offered with grace, but never with desperation. She still believes in real love, the kind that stays, that shows up, that grows with you. But she no longer chases it. She no longer waits for it. She builds it inside herself. Every morning she tells herself, you are worthy, you are enough, you are whole. And on the days she forgets, she reminds herself again. That's what healing looks like. Not perfection, not forgetting, but choosing yourself even when it still hurts. Choosing to believe that love doesn't have to come wrapped in pain. That love can be soft and steady. That love can be safe, especially when it starts from within. She still cries sometimes, not because she's broken, but because she's real, because she feels deeply and cares quietly. Her strength isn't loud, it's in the way she rises after being knocked down, in the way she continues to hope, in the way she offers kindness in a world that once chewed up her heart. That tenderness, it's her power, because anyone can shut down, but it takes a warrior to stay open, to love with intention, to give without losing herself. She's not naive, she's evolved, and her heart now holds wisdom her younger self never knew she'd need. There's something untouchable about a woman who was hurt, who lost, who broke, and still chooses love, not because she's forgotten what pain feels like, but because she knows what she deserves. Because she's finally learned that being soft is a strength, that being gentle is not weakness, and that her love is a gift, not something to be earned through suffering. She carries herself differently now, with grace, with power, with silence. Not everyone will understand it, but the right ones will feel it, because her love now flows from healing, not from holes. And that love, that's unshakable, that's untouchable,